In 2018, I became aware of a case of brazen money laundering in my private surroundings. I have observed how two employees of the Sparkas Fulda savings bank have had laundered black money from a small association for many years, which, however, hosts one of the largest German club events. The extent of this untaxed and therefore illegal income can be seen from how the board of the R Club tried to bring it to safety after it became known. The Board of Association wanted to withdraw the funds with the help from the local mayor of the G municipality via a property transaction before the public prosecutor's office was expected to seize it in order to build a clubhouse on it. The public prosecutor's office in Fulda has started investigations against the board of directors of the association under file number 280 J's 10,134/19 for embezzlement, money laundering, and tax evasion. On October 30, 2019, the mayor of the municipality was prompted to present all information about the real estate transaction. After he refused, according to my criminal complaint against the board of directors of the Association for Money Laundering from November 23, 2019, a criminal complaint for aiding and abetting money laundering was also filed against the mayor on November 24, 2019. After the refusal to surrender, my lawyer filed a lawsuit on February 2, 2020, citing the Hessian Data Protection and Freedom of Information Act. Due to the amount in dispute, an action for the release of the business documents was filed against the association at the Fulda Regional Court. While the slush funds represent tax evasion on the one hand, the payments are to be understood as a salary replacement. Volunteer work is therefore no longer given, which would constitute undeclared work. The corresponding note to the main customs office in Gießen, dated January 29, 2020, remained unanswered. Meanwhile, the treasurer has drawn up retrospective balance sheets to show that the receipts for the real estate business appear to be in order. On December 31, 2019, criminal charges were filed for accounting fraud. The responsible tax office in Fulda was informed of this tax evasion on September 8, 2019. On November 21, 2019, the tax office in Fulda announced, citing tax secrecy, that the association's tax documents would not be made available. On the other hand, within the framework of the precedent set by the Cell Higher Regional Court on November 20, 1989, such an assessment is rejected. The Fulda tax office got informed that tax secrecy, according to paragraph 30 of the tax code, is not applicable in the case of criminal tax proceedings. Despite the request from December 27, 2019 to the Fulda tax office, the tax documents were not handed over. On October 31, 2019, the Hessian Regional Tax Office was informed via the complaints procedure. Nevertheless, the authority follows the opinion of the Fulda tax office. The Kassel Regional Council, which is the competent supervisory authority in Hesse in accordance with the Hessian Savings Banks Act, announced on March 3, 2021 that the money laundering officer at Sparkas Fulda did not find any abnormalities. SGVHT, Sparkassenverband, Hessen Thüringen, and BaFin followed this view, and therefore didn't identify any misconduct either. On November 6, 2020, the BaFin announced that no paragraphs 44 KWG audit would be carried out, and on December 2, 2020, the BaFin announced that the statement by Sparkas Fulda from February 12, 2020 had been blacked out because it concerned business and trade secrets. In summary, it must be stated. 1. Despite the reference to the fact that there is a basis for entitlement to the pass forward the business documents, since membership in the association still existed at the time, the higher regional court ignored this fact and dismissed the lawsuit. 2. The lawsuit against the G municipality on the release of the documents relating to the real estate transaction with the association was rejected. In accordance with its statutes, the G municipality would have had set itself subject to the Hessian Data Protection and Freedom of Information Act, HDSIG. According to the administrative court, since it did not do this, it was able to exempt itself from these disclosure obligations. 3. Disregarding the generally binding judgment of the Seoul Higher Regional Court on the non-applicability of tax secrecy in the case of tax crimes by the Hessian Higher Finance Directorate, the complaint was unsuccessful. 4. The Regional Council of Kassel refers to the examination by the SGVHT, and the SGVHT does not check or refers to the examination by the bank itself, and the BaFin simply agrees on that. 5. The result of the Tax Investigation Office in Kassel under the case number EBR 715/19 and the main customs office in Gießen is unknown. Sounds like making an elephant out of a mosquito. Therefore, one should take a close look at the circumstances. If only one of the aforementioned claims had been successful, this would nevertheless have thrown a light on the Sparkasse and the money laundering of the employees. However, the savings bank had to be protected under all circumstances. On November 25, 2019, the BaFin got informed on the money laundering of the employees at Sparkasse and communicated the file number HGSQB 9100 to 2019/826 via its whistleblower office. In a detailed phone call on May 10, 2020 with the whistleblower office of the BaFin, it turns out that the matter is not going any further at this point. Information on the processing status cannot be given, as no information is submitted to the whistleblower office within the authority. This is interesting because it means that there are institutionalized communication barriers, so-called Chinese walls, within the BaFin. After pointing out these circumstances, I then had to send a fax to the BaFin with an explicit request to be forwarded to the responsible department. Only by that, it could be determined that the money laundering office of the BaFin was handling the matter under file number GGLU2FR 61/8100,672/2020/1. This means that the BaFin is organizationally set up in such a way that suspicious money laundering reports can disappear in the untraceable state in order to be able to discontinue the procedure unnoticed. This is not money laundering prevention, but rather money laundering promotion. Could be that this is what the Federal Minister of Finance was talking about on September 24, 2022, when he described Germany as a money laundering paradise. As a specialist in banking supervision, I am of course even more interested on that matter. With reference to the missing or non-functioning ICS, internal control systems, at Sparkasse and the pending proceedings against the money laundering employees of Sparkasse, criminal charges were filed against the board members of Sparkasse on November 24, 2019 for aiding and abetting money laundering. Season 3 Episode 2 Part 1 explains how money laundering systems at Wirecard were poorly implemented. At savings banks, these systems are highly standardized and provided centrally by the savings bank's IT service provider, as well as being checked by the responsible association, in this case the SGVHT. Based on my professional knowledge of the savings bank IT system, I can say that the anti-money laundering systems of the savings banks work perfectly. Due to the money launderer's business model of depositing 5-digit sums of cash once a year and withdrawing successive amounts over the rest of the year, this behavior falls into a pattern that is easily recognized by anti-money laundering systems. They then generate a suspicion report in order to forward it to the appropriate employee for processing. In the case of the money launderers at Sparkasse, the responsible money laundering officer will have determined that the money launderers were employees of the bank and will have passed this on to the board of directors. This must lead to the conclusion that the board of directors condoned this behavior for many years when the employees were allowed to continue. Employee bank accounts are not uncommon. In recent years, banks have been confronted with the complex requirements and resulting problems of identifying beneficial owners. In the case of employees of a bank who keep accounts in the same name on behalf of third parties, all the alarm bells must therefore ring immediately at a bank's board of directors. This example of a savings bank ICS shows how employees have to countersign as part of a briefing on their anti-money laundering obligations. The directors of a bank are also obliged to do this. On December 21, 2020, the SGVHT got notified about these circumstances. On March 18, 2021, The SGVHE finally answered and announced that it did not want to carry out a special investigations. This is remarkable because the SGVHE is part of the board of directors of the Sparkas Fulda and thus has the task of controlling it. It also contradicts the letter from the Regional Council of Kassel, dated March 3, 2021, according to which, on the contrary, the examination office of the SGVHE was actually investigating on that issue. With reference to the letter from the SGVHT, the DSGV, German Savings Banks and Giro Association, is informed of the circumstances. On February 4, 2021, the answer was that there is no obligation of legal supervision of savings banks and that the actual tasks are to represent interests of savings banks in politics, business, and society. The DSGV now has the opportunity to do this. The behavior of the authorities in investigating money laundering at the Sparkas Fulda corresponds to that in the report of the Investigative Committee of the German Parliament on the behavior of the authorities in the Wirecard-Scandal. Why it was important for the authorities to protect money laundering at Wirecard is explained in the following chapters. At this point, the background is clarified. Why an average-sized savings bank and its board members are protected from the consequences of blatant misconduct by the responsible authorities. To do this, you have to understand how savings banks work. As institutions under public law, savings banks are basically state banks. In this capacity, savings banks are to be supervised by their boards of directors. Due to the state ownership of these banks, the boards of directors are filled with political actors and elected officials. In their annual reports, the position of the savings banks is usually vaguely described with the words that they are deeply rooted in the region. It really is. Savings banks actually make a small contribution to strengthening social cohesion through donations and other funding. However, it is not only this circumstance that invites abuse. The political boards of directors can not only influence the lending of savings banks, especially when it comes to politically desired major projects or the corporate financing of party friends. The political composition of the board of directors can also influence existing business in the form of sanctions. For example, it could happen that a borrower from a savings bank who is critical of political developments in public suddenly finds out that his banking business is developing in an unpleasant way. The measures that could be taken are varied. Even small changes in customer parameters can lower the credit rating calculated by the Sparkassen rating systems. Here's an example. Say you own a business or work in the space industry. Then you are probably the only one in your district. If your bank decides to change the probability of default for this industry, then this only has an impact on the credit that the bank has with you and does not have to explain it further. Such a procedure can then lead to special repayments or the requirement for additional collateral being triggered. Savings banks are the golden calf of local politics, which must be protected despite every doubt. To do this, every means is right, and one does not shy away from lying, even if one gets involved in contradictions. There is also agreement across party lines. Of course, a mayor or district administrator is happy when his savings bank has produced a surplus for his budget. But what makes local politicians even happier is when critics or political opponents can be silenced down financially via their savings bank. To illustrate the importance of savings banks for local politics, one could imagine that a mayor has two phones on his desk, one for regular calls and one to the savings bank's board of directors. The general conditions within which savings banks operate are known not only by local and state politicians and their authorities, but also by BaFin and the Deutsche Bundesbank. The associations of the savings banks are the legitimacy providers. The nepotism that everyone suspects of the savings banks can be proven using the example of the cover-up of money laundering by two employees of the Sparkas Fulda. In this case, it could be shown how politicians allow themselves to be scrutinized by their own authorities in order to obtain the desired result under the semblance of effective control.